Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So in today's video, we are going to look at the concept of taxonomy. And from the word taxonomy means the study of classification of living organisms. So let's start with taxonomy. So taxonomy is one of the branch of biology that deals with the study of classification or classifying living organisms. Generally, there are billions and trillions of living organisms that lived on Earth. Some are now extinct, while some still in existence. And of course, as some organisms evolved, as some organisms evolved, some are also becoming extinct. So when we say extinct organisms, it means that there are organisms that are not longer on Earth, like dinosaurs and so many others. And at the same time, as some organisms are disappearing, new species are coming. So that is why biologists, because of the existence of the billions of living organisms, they actually decide to come up with a system of classifying organisms. So the process of classifying organisms is called taxonomy, which is one of the major trifords or branches of biology. So this taxonomy, it includes the naming organisms, that is binomial nomenclature. So according to Carolus Linnaeus is the father of taxonomy. He's the first scientist that was able to actually classify organisms based on their physical features. And of course, this scientist was able to develop a system of naming organisms. And according to him, each organism has two names: binomial, that is why it's called binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. It means that each and every organism has two names: generic name and specific name. And generic name always starts with capital letter, while species name or specific name start with small letter. And after you write the name, either it recites the two names or you underline the names. So that is actually the system of naming living organisms. And let me just give you examples. Like, for example, when we have Homo sapien, Homo, Homo, Homo sapien. Homo sapien is the typical examples of it's a typical example of binomial nomenclature. You see Homo and sapien. So you either italicize it or you underline the name. So you see, for the Homo here, it started with capital letter, and the sapien here, it starts with the small letter. So that is how we name organisms. And of course, at the same time, and I have a video where you can also, if you want to actually understand more of the system of naming living organisms, you can watch it, and it's basic on taxonomy. I will tag the video here. So, and then apart from it includes the nomenclature and also assigning organisms into group called taxa. So we can actually, according to these scientists, organisms, they can be assigned into groups, and each group is called taxa. We can have, like, for example, we have reptiles. What are reptiles? Reptiles are organisms that actually move by crawling. Like, for example, snake is there, lizard is there. So because they have similar way of moving, so that is why scientists can classify organisms based on their habitat, based on their nutrition, based on their locomotion. You can actually classify organisms based on that. So like for example, we have taxer reptiles, because all the organisms under reptiles, they move by crawling. So therefore, taxonomy includes nomenclature and assigning organisms into groups called taxa. And then, of course, in addition, we have different types of taxonomy. So we have different way of classifying organisms. So that is why we classify taxonomy into different types. We have number one, we have artificial classification. So an artificial classification is, although let me just list all the types. So we have a natural classification and we have phylogenetic classification. So artificial classification is a type of taxonomy in which organisms are assigned interview based on their morphological features. So scientists can only actually classify organisms based on their morphological features. That is how they look like, maybe in terms of color, the way they move, the types of food that they are taking, or their habitat. The scientists can classify organisms based on the morphological features. That is what you can see from that organism, what that organisms can do. And that is what you call artificial classification. And then we have natural classification. So in natural classification, scientists are classifying organisms based on their ancestral relationship, that is evolutionary relationship, whether they come from descent or from common ancestor, that is evolutionary relationship. And of course, phylogenetic classification in some other textbooks you see phylogenetic classification based on as sub branches or as some types of natural classification, because in phylogenetic classification is also the types of classification that used in classifying organisms based on their also evolutionary relationship. And as we are doing the class, we will actually look at how this classification varies from one another. Then we also have the hierarchical way of classifying organisms. So we have hierarchical classification of living organisms. So we started from different hierarchies. So first we have life. So everything that has life can also be classified according to taxonomists. So the life you can actually look at living organisms and classify it into domain. And of course, we have three domains. We have domain eukarya, we have domain bacteria, and we have domain archaea. So we have three archaea. Sorry, we have three domains. We have domain archaea, we have domain bacteria, and we have domain eukarya. So each and every living organism fall under this domain. So whenever you see any organism, so the first thing that you need to do, think on which of the actually domain that organisms will be, depend on the future of the organism. So you need to understand also what is domain and the different characteristics of the domain. So actually, domain, like eukarya, is a group of organisms, or is actually comprises all organisms that are eukaryotic. That is, those organisms that have cell, and of course their cell have specific nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. While in the case of eubacteria and archaea, they are organisms, or they are prokaryotic. It means that they doesn't have nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So therefore, if you see any organism, the first thing that you need to do, look at the organism. Is that organisms having nucleus and membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, like Golgi body, and others? So if that organism has that, it means that it falls under eukarya. And if it doesn't have nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, so you have to think whether it is going to eubacteria or archaea. So what are the difference between archaea and eubacteria? So generally, archaea, they are bacteria that survive under harsh condition. That is high acidic, high temperature, high ionic strength, and so many others. And then the next thing after life domain is kingdom. So we have different kingdoms. We have kingdom animalia, kingdom fungi, kingdom plantae, and many others. Kingdom animalia, kingdom plantae, kingdom fungi, kingdom monera, and kingdom animalia. And then we have phyla, class, order, family, genus, and species. So these are actually the hierarchical system of naming or classifying organisms. Sometimes I actually summarize it as K, P, COF, GS. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. and the species is the smallest unit of classifying organism. So this is actually hierarchical system of naming organism. So then the next thing that we are going to look at is the artificial classification. That is the different types of classification. So in the artificial classification is based on the morphological characteristics such as color, mode of locomotion, habitat, nutrition also. So based on the color or how organisms move and the habitat that they belong, organisms can be classified. Then we have natural. So a natural is a method of grouping organisms based on their shared characteristics and evolutionary relationships. So you can have organisms to have, or you can have organisms classified based on their shared characteristics if they have similar characteristics or evolutionary relationships. Maybe from evolution if they actually came from the same ancestor. So usually we use a cladogram. Cladogram, this is actually a typical cladogram. So we use cladogram to trace whether organisms actually came from common ancestor or they have ancestry relationship. Like for example, this is maybe the organisms have evolutionary relationships. So you see, this is reptiles. So this is the ancestor. So it means that mammals, reptiles, turtles, lizards, and snakes, crocodiles, and bats actually came from the same common ancestor. But one thing that we should understand here is that this indicates that bad here, it means that in terms of the evolutionary relationships, they are very far from human. And tortoise, it means that they are very close in terms of the evolutionary relationships. And as we can see here for the phylogenetic system, it reflects a possible evolutionary relationships based on ancestry and descent. When we said ancestry and descent, it means that when the organism come from the same ancestor. But evolutionary relationships is a relationships that trying to show whether the organisms are actually a match or have any close relationships in terms of their in terms of the genomic content. So you can see that, as I said, natural classification and phylogenetic classification, they are, or the phylogenetic system, they have similar approach. So that is why phylogenetic and natural system of classifying organisms, they are actually trying to address the same thing, because they are trying to classify is when the scientists are trying to classify organisms based on their evolutionary relationships. So what I wanted to see here, ladies and gentlemen, it means that living organisms are classified based on their physical characteristics, that is physical features, that is their morphological characteristics and evolutionary relationships. But you cannot actually know whether the organisms have evolutionary relationships without understanding their genome, that is their DNA. So then the next thing is actually phonetic classification. So phonetic classification is based on the evidence data compiled from cytological, structural, and biochemical similarities between organisms. So what I wanted to say here is in phonetic classification, scientists used to classify organisms when actually a data compiled based on the cytological, that is the data from cell, structurally and how the organisms look like structurally or anatomically, and then also biochemical data. So compiling cytological, structural, and biochemical similarities or differences between organisms, then you can also classify them. And that type of classification is called phonetic classification. So let's actually look at the phonetic classification and phylogenetic classification. So you see, as we said, in phonetic classification is based on compiled data from cytological, structural, and biochemical similarities or differences. So look at this. In phonetic classification, you see that the lizards and crocodile, they are very close. They are very close in terms of their evolutionary relationship. But look at here, the lizards is far apart from crocodile. So at this point, crocodile and bat are very close. So that is what I wanted us to understand. So this is actually what you call cladogram or cladistic. So this is actually a cladistic relationship. So phenetic and phylogenetic. So you see, evolutionarily, it means that dinosaurs and bats, they are very close. But in the case of phenetic, you see, you can see that the lizards and dinosaurs are very close. So this is actually different ways that you can use to classify organisms. So then the next thing that we are going to look at is actually introduction to the four groups of classifying some of these organisms. So generally, organisms are classified as protozoa, metazoa, Mesozoa, and Parazoa. So each group has a distinct characteristics and evolutionary significance. So each of these are the four major groups of organisms based on their cellular composition and organization. So organisms can be classified based on their organization and cellular composition. And this classification based on cellular composition and organization are protozoa, Mesozoa, Parazoa, and protozoa. So each of these groups have a distinct characteristics and evolutionary significance. So understanding this classification in biology or in studying animal and evolution is very important. So it helps to understand animal biology and evolution. So let's look at, let's start with the protozoa. So protozoa are the most part of their life unicellular. So they are unicellular. So protozoa are single cell eukaryote organisms. So they are eukaryotes. It means that they have membrane, and they have membrane organelles and nucleus. So they have nucleus and membrane bound organelles, but they are single cell. It means that they are unicellular. So they have only one cell. So that is why they are called single cell eukaryote organisms. And they are found in various environments. You can find them in many environments. So that is why they are called unicellular, because they are single cell organisms and they have only one cell. And one very importantly, these protozoa, they exhibit a diverse form of locomotion. They can move in different ways. Like, for example, there are some of these organisms that can use flagella. There are some of these organisms that can use cilia, like in the case of Paramecium. The Euglena can move with flagella, and we have pseudopodia, that is amoeba. So amoeba can use pseudopodia to move. So it means that each of these protozoan organisms, they can actually move from one place to another based on their mode of locomotion, and they have different organelles that they use in moving from one point to another. And these protozoa, they actually carried out their function. They carry out their vital functions using their organelles. So they have different organelles. And some of these organelles is like the flagella, cilia, pseudomonas. They have nucleus, they have mitochondria. So the vital functions of protozoa are carried out by their organelles. And protozoa are crucial for ecological balance, often serving as a primary consumers in food webs. So you know that in food webs and food chain, we have different organisms that play different roles. You can have primary producers, primary consumers, and so many. So it means that since this one, they are primary consumers in food webs, it means that they eat from photosynthetic organisms. So then the next thing, one very interesting thing is that these protozoa, they lack specialized tissues. So they lack specialized tissue because they only have one cell. So they cannot even form a tissues and organs. So they function independently as cellular units because they have only one cell. So that is why they can't have specialized tissues and they cannot have specialized organs. So they can actually function independently as cellular. So they reproduce, generally their mode of reproduction is asexually, most of them using a binary fusion. So by binary fusion, that is by dividing themselves into two, this organism can be divided. So by binary fusion, and then they also exhibit sexual reproduction. So they can actually reproduce sexually. So many protozoans are capable of forming cysts. They can form cysts which help them to survive harsh conditions. So you see some of the examples of these protozoans we have, like Trypanosoma, we have Plasmodium falciparum, that is the parasite that causes malaria, and then Trypanosoma is the parasite that causes trypanosomiasis, that is sniffing sickness. So then the next thing that we are going to look at is Metazoa. So in Metazoa, from the word meta, it means that they are multicellular, meaning that they have many cells. So they are multicellular organisms that exhibit complex structure. So the introduction to Metazoa generally they are multicellular and they exhibit a complex structures and specialized cells. So they have, generally they are invertebrate, but they have specialized cells. So they can undergo, or they undergo cellular specialization and differentiation. So they are characterized by having differentiated tissues and organ system allowing for various functions. So they are multicellular, meaning that they have many cells and they can undergo cellular differentiation. So they are invertebrates which can undergo cellular differentiation, and that makes them to have differentiated cells and differentiated organs. So these differentiated cells, it means that the cells in Metazoa, they vary from one another, and because of this variability of the cells, that is why they are going to have different functions, because there are different cells due to cellular differentiation, so therefore they are going to have different function. So this group includes a vast diversity of organisms, from sponges to mammals, and they are actually, one very interesting things, these Mesozoa are typically multicellular and undergo various developmental stages such as embryonic development. So they can actually start from embryo. So they primarily reproduce sexually, although some can reproduce asexually. So it means that most of them, they reproduce sexually, that is by through male and female gamete, but very few undergo a sexual mode of reproduction. So most Metazoans exhibit a higher level of organization, which allows for greater complexity in behavior and behavior. So because they can undergo cellular differentiation, cellular specialization, that is why these organisms, they can actually reach a higher level of complexity in behavior and physiology. And one very interesting thing is that these Metazoa are divided into two levels. We have Diploplastica and Triploplastica, or in some other textbooks you can see it as diploplastic or triploplastic. So Diploplastica or diploplastic, it means that they have two primary germ layers, the outer layer and the inner layer, which is endoderms and ectoderms. And also they have mesoglia, that is a jelly-like substances found in between. So you see, it means that in the diploplastic, they have two layers, that is the outer ectoderms and the inner endoderms. And in between them, there is what we call a mesoglia. The mesoglia is a jelly-like structure that is found in between the two layers. And they are represented by a phyla. These diploplastic, they are represented by a phyla, Nidiria and Tenephora. So the mesoderm allows them to develop true tissue, which associated with the gut and associated glands, while the ectoderms give rise to epidermis and nervous tissue and effraden nephridia. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to say here is that So, ladies and gentlemen, what I want you to understand, these layers, endoderms and ectoderm, they are like stem cells, and they have the ability to differentiate into a specific type of cell. And remember, when we say stem cells, although you might not know what we call stem cells, so generally we have what we call a stem cells. They are the cells that have the capacity to differentiate and specialize into a specific types of cell. For example, the stem cells can be differentiated to give red blood cells, can be differentiated to give brain cells, can be differentiated to give kidney cells, pancreatic cells. So, like for example, here the endoderms are examples of the stem cells, and they have the ability to develop into root tissues, especially tissues that are associated with the gut and associated gland like endocrine gland, thyroid gland, and then of course for the ectoderm, it means that they are the stem cells that can give rise to epidermis, nervous tissue, and if present, nephridia in insects. So, and then we have triploblastic. So it includes all the more complex. It includes all the more complex animals from plant worms to humans. So it means that in triploblastica, they have three germ layers: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So it means that at this point, mesoderm is included, while in the diploblastica, uh, the mesoderms is absent. So then the next thing is Mesozoa. So what is Meso? Mesozoa, from the word meso, means middle. It means middle. So it is in between. It is in between the. It is in between the two organisms, which is multicellular and protozoan. That is true multicellular and protozoans. So they are in between, they are middle. That is why they are called meso. So they are in between true multicellular organisms and protozoans. So mesozoa are lesser known group of simple multicellular organisms that are parasitic in nature. So mesozoa generally are parasitic in nature, and they are primarily found in marine environment, that is in water, and have a unique life cycle involving host. So they also have a unique life cycles which also found in host, that is the organisms that can cause damage in or on them. So this group is composed of very few species, mostly consisting of ciliated worms. So most of them, they are worms. Then characteristics of Mesozoa. So Mesozoan exhibit a simple body structure, often consisting of only two layers of cells. So it means that they contain only two layers of cell, and they lack two organs and systems. So they doesn't have true organs and system relying on their host for nutrient and reproduction. So what actually happened in Mesozoan, they are like obligate parasites. They cannot actually they don't have the lack organs and system for them to generate nutrients and their reproduction. So they only depend on their hosts' nutrients for their development as well as reproduction. So then their parasitic lifestyle is influenced their morphology and life cycle adaptation. So it means that their morphology and life cycles adaptations is influenced by their lifestyle. So their lifestyle is what actually influences how they look like, that is their morphology, and also how they adapt to the environment. So, and then the next thing is Parazoa. So Parazoa are primarily represented by sponges. They are simple multicellular organisms without true tissues. So they doesn't have true tissues, and then they exhibit a porous body structure that allows water to flow through. So they have porous body structure where the water can penetrate into them and pass through. So this water movement or this porous body facilitates their feeding and respiration. So parazoans, they play a vital role in aquatic system, contributing to nutrient cycling and habitat structure. So they help or they assist in nutrient cycling and habitat structure. So what are the characteristics of Mesozoa? So parazoans lack specialized organs and systems. So they doesn't have specialized organs and system operating through a cellular level organizations. So they reproduce both sexually and asexually, often through budding or fragmentation. So it means that they can actually reproduce through budding and fragmentation. That is, they can exhibit both sexual and asexual reproduction. And their unique cellular composition includes specialized cells like choanocytes, which aid in feeding. So they have a cell called choanocytes, which help them in their feedings. So in conclusion and significance, understanding protozoa, metazoa, mesozoa, and parazoa enhances our knowledge of biological diversity. So each group plays a crucial role in their respective ecosystems and offer insight into evolutionary process. So continued research on this group is essential for advancement in biology and environmental science. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of this lecture, and I hope you'll find this video very interesting. And if this is the first time you are coming to my YouTube channel, please try to subscribe and join into the YouTube community. And we are going to we'll meet in the next video. So I'm going to make the continuation of this video, and I hope you find this video very interesting. Thank you. Bye bye.